When picturing historical warfare, we usually imagine a decisive, bone-crushing moment, a wall of heavy cavalry slamming into an infantry line, shattering it in seconds. But history suggests this combat effectiveness comes with a trade-off. While these units excel in the moment of impact, they are often the most difficult part of an army to keep operational. Fielding an unstoppable elite unit often creates a dangerous illusion. A commander sees unmatched battlefield dominance, blinding them to the structural weaknesses that often develop in the background. To keep these hyper-elite forces operational, a state has to commit a massive, disproportionate share of its wealth, raw materials, and political capital. This graph illustrates the specialization trap. Combat effectiveness surges as a unit perfects its niche, but that peak precedes sudden failure. Compare that to standardized infantry. The immediate impact is lower, but output remains stable, ensuring long-term survival. Betting your empire on overpowered units is an organizational gamble. A single shift in the economy or a new piece of technology can instantly erase decades of specialized military investment. The quickest way to acquire elite military power is simply buying it, outsourcing violence by hiring highly specialized mercenary forces. The strategic appeal is clear. You get immediate, plug-and-play superiority without spending the years required to train a domestic army. Look at the Numidian cavalry at the Battle of Cannae. Riding without saddles or bridles, they gave Hannibal an instant tactical advantage, pinning down the Romans while the rest of his forces wrapped around and slaughtered 50,000 men. But that immediate yield comes with a steep organizational cost. Mercenary elites possess no institutional loyalty. Keeping them on the field requires continuous, massive injections of capital. When the money runs out, the results can be devastating. In 1527, the German Landsknecht mercenaries stopped getting paid. They immediately mutinied and sacked Rome, looting the Vatican for a week. These assets can also be turned against their employers by a higher bidder. Rome eventually bought off those exact same Numidian cavalrymen, turning Hannibal's best weapon against him to crush Carthage at Zama. Mercenaries deliver high short-term tactical yield, but the moment your treasury is exhausted, your most lethal defensive asset can convert into an internal threat. A second path is trying to engineer invulnerability, pouring incredible resources into heavy armor or exotic assets. But units like China's fully encased Iron Pagoda cavalry required massive economic output. A single suit of this armor took years to manufacture. The goal was to create an unstoppable frontal shock force designed to completely shatter standard infantry lines through pure, unyielding physics. But achieving that level of kinetic power forces systemic inflexibility. You build a machine that only does one thing, and it cannot pivot when the battlefield changes. When an enemy introduces a cheap, asymmetric tactic, these rigid, expensive units are neutralized almost instantly. In 1211, Genghis Khan's light Mongol horse archers dismantled the Iron Pagoda cavalry. They simply avoided the charge, running circles around the heavy formations and picking off the unarmored horses until the chain trios collapsed. Roman commanders did something similar to Carthage's war elephants at Zama. Instead of fighting brute force with brute force, they just opened empty lanes in their infantry lines, letting the animals charge right through, hitting nothing. Hyper-armored units concentrate too much capital into single points of failure. They are vulnerable to tactical innovation rather than just a stronger force. The final elite strategy requires dedicating a citizen's entire life to mastering a singular physical skill. Think of the Welsh Longbowmen. To draw a 160-town yew-bow, boys had to start training at age 7, permanently altering their bone structure over decades of practice. This lifelong dedication produces a soldier with unmatched lethality and unit cohesion on the battlefield. We see this clearly in the Khalsa warriors of the Sikh Empire. These religious warrior saints trained across multiple weapon disciplines from childhood, acting as a highly synchronized force. Looking at this historical image of Khalsa troops, you can see the wide array of fear they mastered. Holding curved swords and long rifles, every man represents decades of intensive conditioning. But that intense training creates a scalability crisis. When one of these veterans dies, it takes 20 years to grow a replacement. Basic battlefield attrition becomes mathematically fatal to the empire. This is why gunpowder ended the era of the elite archer. A 20-year lifetime of combat conditioning could be matched by a peasant taught to fire a musket in just 6 weeks. Elite forces trained from birth are not defeated by superior skill. They are wiped out by scalable, low-skill technologies that outpace their ability to replace casualties. The pattern is consistent. Historical, overpowered units fail because their intense specialization makes them unable to adapt to sudden environmental, economic, or technological shifts. This scorecard breaks down the choice between specialization and standardization. Elites have a specific use case. They are necessary only when a leader needs a short-term, decisive shock to break an immediate stalemate. But deploying them requires strict prerequisites: absolute treasury control to prevent mutiny, or irreplaceable central leadership, like Alexander the Great with his companion cavalry. Standardization, on the other hand, is the mandatory choice for an empire building for generational longevity and resilience against disruption. Any strategy reliant on unreplaceable resources, whether it takes decades of training or years of forging armor, is exactly one shift away from collapse. True historical military dominance does not rely on fielding the heaviest armor or the deadliest warriors. It relies on the ability to mass-produce good enough forces while watching enemies bankrupt themselves paying for perfect.